The following is an authorized transmission from Starfleet Command Tactical Institute. It is no longer classified.
Hello and welcome back to ReExamined Reads. If you're like me, you're a big fan of the battles in Deep Space Nine during the Dominion War. Battles with hundreds of Federation, Klingon, Romulan, Dominion, Cardassian, and later Breen ships is Star Trek at its best. The Dominion War was also the first time in Trek that we saw multiple classes of ships working together in fleet action. So in this video, I'd like to analyze the role of each class and type of ship when they're working together in a fleet. We'll cover their functions, responsibilities, and even the strengths and weaknesses of each ship. Please keep in mind that the scaling might be off in this representation from our perspective, but we're looking at a three-dimensional battle with a two-dimensional view. It should also be noted that this video represents ships we saw early in the Dominion War, and a few designs we saw later may be missing. So to begin, let's take a look at the terminology that's been used to describe an assembly of ships in Star Trek. A fleet. Fleets are usually large and contain enough military vessels to sustain long-term missions and operations. A task force is a group of ships assembled temporarily for a short-term mission or objective. Unlike a fleet, a task force would be expected to return to resupply before the next assignment. Now at this point, you can place a prefix on the term task force. A joint task force is a mixture of assets from different groups. For example, a group of Federation and Klingon ships working together on a single objective. A strike task force is a group assembled for a single military operation or strike. A relief task force is a group of ships assembled for a single relief operation, such as a humanitarian crisis, or to defend a single target under siege. A convoy usually refers to a group of civilian ships, medical ships, or freighters that may or may not have military escorts. The size of fleets is variable. The Federation 7th Fleet had 112 ships. The fleet that took back Deep Space Nine from the Dominion was composed of 600 Federation ships, and an unspecified number added when the Klingons arrived. So let's take a look at the different sections and wings that make up a fleet. We have Scouts, the main fleet, the defensive group, the attack wings, and the supply and support group. Scouts are ships designed to be the eyes and ears of the fleet. Their purpose is not to engage the enemy, but to gather intelligence. They count ships, define classes, and assess the threat. They gather information on stellar phenomena, such as comets, nebulas, planets, ion storms, and anything else that might affect military operations, and then report back. Scout ships trade heavy weapons and strong shields for maneuverability and high warp speeds. They have advanced sensors to help them peer ahead of the fleet and gain as much information as possible. Our next area is the main fleet. We'll begin with the Galaxy Wing. These were, until the introduction of the Sovereign class, the largest and most powerful ships in the Federation fleet. The Galaxy class's role is simple. It's a powerful mobile weapons platform designed to attack other capital ships, cruisers, light cruisers, and destroyers. It can carry shuttles and runabouts to aid in fleet operations, and once the families are removed, it is an effective troop carrier. The Galaxy class does have its weaknesses. It's not designed to fight multiple small vessels at once. It's less maneuverable than smaller ships at sublight. The Galaxy class wasn't originally designed for full-time combat operations. It was a ship of exploration. This means it's costly to maintain, requiring larger crews and more supplies to operate. This may seem like a small thing, but during times of supply shortages, it can seriously impede the operation of the vessel. Next, we have the cruiser wings, which are made up of the Ambassador and Excelsior classes. Both have the same weaknesses and strengths as the Galaxy class. They're not designed to fight smaller ships, they're much less maneuverable at sublight, they weren't originally designed for full-time combat operations, and they're costly to maintain. The Excelsior class has other limitations. Since the design has been around for nearly 100 years, some of these vessels are simply too old for combat operations. They cannot be upgraded beyond a certain point. This would result in smaller power systems, less effective phasers, shields, and weapons, as well as lower maximum sustained warp speeds. Excelsior-class ships deemed too old for frontline combat can be used in support operations like resupply, patrols outside the operational theater, and convoy protection. Now we've discussed how each of these three classes lack maneuverability and are not effective against multiple smaller targets such as fighters. This brings us to our next ship, the escort vessels. These would include the Miranda, Defiant, and Intrepid classes. Escort vessels are not designed to attack larger ships. Their sole function is to defend the fleet against smaller craft. In this example, we have Miranda-class ships working together in tandem. By combining their areas of effective fire, they can use their weapon systems to create a zone around the fleet to defend the larger ships from attacking smaller craft. Looking at this diagram, you can see why formation is so important to maintain. The ships in the fleet protect each other in a well-designed pattern, provided everyone holds their position. Ships that fall outside this pattern are no longer protected or compromise protection to other ships. Behind the capital ships come the Curry-class carriers. The role of the carrier in the 24th century is the same as it is in the 21st century. They provide short-range, heavily armed fighters to combat operations. While the combination of Curry-class and the fighters aboard makes it a powerful weapon, the ship on its own has some weaknesses. Like the capital ships, it's not designed to fight smaller vessels. Because of its size, it's not very maneuverable, and far less so than a Galaxy, Ambassador, or Excelsior class. It operates at a much slower speed than other vessels due to its launching and retrieving of fighters, and must lower its shields to allow the smaller craft to pass through. Because of its role in the fleet, it's a prime target for the enemy. The fighters the Curry-class carries are broken up into offensive and defensive squadrons. The number in each squadron varies depending on the engagement. The defensive squadron supplements the escort vessels, attacking any fighter or smaller ship that makes a run at the fleet. They hold their position around the fleet and don't attack until the enemy comes to them. The offensive squadrons are sent in waves to the enemy fleet to weaken defenses, attack smaller craft protecting the enemy fleet, and to engage smaller enemy escort vessels. Once these runs are complete and the attack wing moves in, the offensive squadrons go and run cover for them, defending the ships against lighter fighter attack and hitting smaller targets of opportunity. The attack wing of the fleet is composed of fast and maneuverable ships. Their job is to clear a path to the main fleet's primary targets. In this example, the attack wing is made up of Nebula-class, Eureka-class, a small group of Miranda-class outfitted for offensive operations, runabouts, and fighter craft. Their first job is to clear any fighter craft that will be sent out to intercept them. At this point, the ships will either succeed in getting through, or be destroyed or disabled. If they do manage to break through, they move on to the enemy fleet. Once there, these ships will attempt to remove the escort craft and any fighters protecting the fleet's main target, in this case the Dominion battleship. They complete their mission and regroup in the staging area behind the fleet, which is moving up to engage. Fresh attack vessels will move up, as seen in the lower half of the screen, to protect the ship's starboard flank. The Federation fleet will either fail or destroy their target. Once complete, they will also regroup, assess their losses, evaluate the enemy's new strength, and either attack again or withdraw. The battle would continue like this until one side is defeated or retreats. In the Dominion War, it seems unlikely the Dominion fleet would ever surrender without being ordered to do so by a founder. So this leaves us with die or retreat to fight another day. If a Vorta wants to save their own skin, or believes they are simply throwing away Dominion assets in a needless way, they are quite capable of ordering a strategic withdrawal, as they did when Terek Nor fell to the Federation. This brings us to what happens after the battle. What is not usually considered, but is very much part of fleet operations, is the Supply and Recovery Wing. This would be a small group of ships remaining far enough behind the front line to stay out of combat, but close enough to render assistance as needed. They would remain on standby until the fleet succeeded in eliminating the enemy or requiring assistance in withdrawing. During the time of the Dominion War, the Federation would have hospital ships, similar to the USS Pasteur, which we saw in the final Next Generation episode, All Good Things. These ships would have been designed to have better medical equipment, more medical supplies, and personnel than a standard starship sickbay. They would be on par with a starbase medical facility and would be needed to treat the massive numbers of injured a battle with hundreds of ships would generate. There are several reasons to move critical but stabilized wounded off a combat vessel. First, it frees up medical personnel to help crew members who, with minor treatment, can return to duty. A damaged ship would not need to divert power to anything but basic sickbay systems while under repair. Damaged sickbay equipment can be moved down from the priority list of repairs in favor of the basics such as shields, engines, and weapons. Finally, a ship with its own basic system restored can assist other ships in the fleet without diverting resources to large amounts of wounded. The Supply and Recovery Wing would also have vessels from the Starfleet Corps of Engineers. These ships would be standing by to beam teams of damage control specialists to damaged vessels and get them underway as soon as possible. In addition to repair teams and equipment, these ships would have industrial replicators aboard to provide basic parts, as well as portable power generators, computers, and life support units. These ships would carry items that can't be replicated, such as complex fuels, armaments, and other vital components. When the battle area has been secured, there are other tasks at hand, such as the recovery of enemy materials. This would entail boarding parties entering the wreckage of enemy vessels to secure data, weapon systems, and anything else of military value. These ships would also set about scuttling or destroying ships, friendly and enemy alike. This would prevent the enemy from returning to salvage their vessels, and it would prevent Federation assets too badly damaged to move from being scavenged and technology or information stolen. One item not discussed at length in Star Trek is prisoners of war. After search and rescue operations of the fleet are complete, it would be assumed that prisoners of war would be taken. You would need a place to keep them, so there must be some form of prisoner of war vessels that would take POWs from the ships on the battlefield and bring them back to a facility or starbase. Separate ships are a reasonable assumption. The last thing you want aboard a vessel that is heavily damaged and understaffed is prisoners that would require food, air, guards, and containment systems. The final vessel we will discuss in the fleet are TUGS. These appear to be vessels whose only function is to tow other vessels in the short term until main power is restored, or in the long term all the way back to a Federation repair yard. The speed and number of crew aboard these vessels has never been mentioned, but one assumes it's a minimal crew and the ship has a low warp factor. We assume this because it's a small vessel towing a much larger one, and a damaged vessel being towed at high warp might not survive the trip. As for the crew, these are not combat vessels and likely have a lot of automated systems to perform the single task of towing. This wraps up our presentation on Federation fleets. If you have any comments or questions, leave them in the section below. If you like what you saw today, please give a like and subscribe. But more importantly, share a link of this video with your favorite Star Trek fan. It would be most appreciated. Thank you for watching.